looking at all the Planet of the Apes movies.
Our technology on Rise of the Planet of the Apes was very much a prototype.
I just remember thinking, oh my God, we've done it. We can make anything we want now. It's perfect.
Oh, you want to drink? Whoa.
Oh, whoa, wait.
That's the most perfect CG bottle of water I've ever seen in my life.
Bad ape.
An ape's face and a human's face are quite different. None of this stuff is feed dots into a black box and out comes an ape. That's where the art comes into this process.
Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of Visual Effects Artists React. Today is Apes Day because we are looking at a bunch of apes.
We have a very special guest today. We are joined by none other than Erik Winquist, who is VFX supervisor at Weta FX.
I've been down at Weta for about 22, 3, something like that, years now.
Yeah, what was the first movie you worked on there?
The Two Towers.
Erik here was a VFX supervisor on all the Planet of the Apes movies.
Not only Rise, Dawn, War, but now Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
What a wonderful day!
Kingdom is out now in theaters.
We just saw it last night. It's a great movie.
But before we talk about the insane effects in Kingdom, we wanted to go back and cover the groundbreaking work done on the Apes trilogy.
We have so much to talk about.
We have a lot. We should begin.
Let's react.
So you were the lead visual effects supervisor on the latest film, but back in 2011, you were one of many artists working on Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
So Dan Lemon was our overall visual effects soup on this one. All the stuff that I was looking after were the Golden Gate Bridge, the action unit stuff, and then second unit scenes of toddler Caesar making his way through the attic and all those kind of shots. On Rise of the Planet of the Apes, we were working out a way to essentially take the performance capture that was done on Avatar and bring it out into the daylight for the first time, right? Normally in a motion capture stage, cameras are each emitting infrared light. They bounce off retroreflective markers on the actors, and those markers bounce it back to the cameras. That's what we've been using since Lord of the Rings. Retroreflective markers, that doesn't work outside because the sun has got so much infrared light in its spectrum.
Blasts everything.
So you've got to find a way to overpower the sun in that sense. And so what our mocap team had come up with was we could actually have the actors emit light instead of reflect light. And so now they were wearing actual infrared LEDs that were actively putting out infrared spectrum that the cameras could see. And it allowed us to go out onto location and actually get the performances of not just Andy and the other hero apes, but also all of our stunt players that were part of that big stunt extravaganza. That really kind of turned the page in terms of what we could do with performance capture.
So was toddler Caesar mocapped by a toddler?
No. Andy played the toddler version of Caesar, when he's jumping on the bed and those kind of shots.
Amazing.
Obviously, with the massive size difference between Andy and that toddler, that got into some interesting situations with, James Franco and Frida Pinto and having to interact with this guy who was much bigger than they actually were.
So not only did he have to channel his inner monkey, he had to channel his inner child.
Yes, all of those
Inner
things.
monkey child.
Yeah.
I think the strongest suit of the movie was the animation, like the facial animation, the eyes in particular. Like, I remember when this came out, I was still in college at the time, and there's one specific shot that blew my mind, and it's the one where Caesar's just kind of sitting there, and without moving his head, his eyes turn to the right. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, we've done it. We can make anything we want now. It's perfect.
Yeah.
The thing is funny now, when I look back to the behind the scenes from this thing, like our technology on that compared with what we have now was very much, it looks like a prototype. It's like literal pieces of gaffer tape holding an LED down that are Velcroed to a suit that have like literal exposed wires that are connecting them. I mean, the stuff still looks great and it still tells the story, it still really pulls you in. And this is the way that it's supposed to go. It's like you're supposed to be getting better as you go.
I'm here at the Apes enclosure here at Corridor because earlier I left my laptop out with Squarespace loaded up, and the results have been amazing. The Apes have actually started to learn how to make a website because of the award-winning templates that Squarespace provides. Squarespace has upped the game with their new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. Yeah, these apes are very visual, but fortunately the Fluid engine makes the website editing process very easy. You can just drag and drop different elements around, and it allows them to not break their creative process. And of course, I didn't even have to make anything from scratch because they're just starting with these award-winning templates from the start, and they could edit it from there. The Apes also seemed really appreciative of the fact that they could just connect all of their Instagram or other social media accounts to their website with just a couple clicks. Squarespace makes this really easy to sell anything online, and with their flexible payment systems, you can accept all kinds of different payments. I have noticed the Apes have started trying to sell all of their armaments. They make the checkout process really easy. They accept everything from credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, all kinds of stuff. You can even pay later with Afterpay. Oh, it looks like they're done. I can't wait to see what they've done. Okay, obviously Squarespace is a powerful tool. I think I need to get out of here. But if you want to make your own website, all you got to do is go to squarespace.com/corridorcrew and you can get 10% off a purchase of your first domain or website. Remember, apes together, square. Obviously, you must have taken a lot of learning experience from the first movie and applied it to the second one.
By the time we knew we were getting into this one, we had talked to our friends next door at Weta Workshop to actually build versions of the strands, as we call them, that actually were rubberized, and the LEDs themselves were housed in kind of like a rigid plastic, so that
a little bit more robust.
They could
Less gaff tape required.
Yes, no gaffer tape
Hey,
required.
there you go.
Yeah, and just were a lot more robust for stunt work, and we could take them out into these kind of conditions where it was just raining constantly.
Right, yeah, because you guys are like wearing mocap, like riding horses through a river, because at least on Rise, on the bridge, that was still like a controlled set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you look at what the crew's wearing in these behind-the-scenes shots. Like it was wet. We were just out in the woods in Vancouver. Yeah, and that was the big breakthrough, I think, on this one. I think also at the time this was the first time we were using wireless mocap cameras as well, and so they could strap a camera to a tree, and we wouldn't have to run cables through the set or underneath the set or something. So all of that stuff really helped this process.
What was that thing that guy was swinging back and forth?
That's the wand.
What is wand? What is the wand?
You'll see that kind of thing behind the scenes in all of these films. That's how we calibrate the volume, so that every camera can observe an object of known dimensions.
Right.
The LED little ping pong balls are essentially flickering infrared light, and the cameras are seeing those, and the system is recording the point position of all three of those LEDs. And so basically you're just wandering through the set, essentially painting the entire volume of 3D space. And then based on that, they can run a really quick solve and lock in all the cameras. If they have to move a camera, because whatever, somebody just put a big set piece up in front of it, we need to redo this again. It's something that the first ADs always go, oh God, here we go. But it's like, well, this is essential for the process. If we don't have a calibrated volume, we don't have mocap. So once we've got all that stuff dialed in, we can throw our performers in there. We don't want them to be thinking about the technology. We care about that they're giving the best performances they can, and that the director is getting what they need from those performances on the day, which is a little bit hard when there's a giant thing sticking in front of your head.
Sure, yeah.
But it's kind of a necessary evil just to make sure that we're getting the performance part of it. This was a scene that we just had so much fun making, and obviously Toby Kebbell, who plays Koba, and these guys had a great time actually doing the scene itself.
There you go. Whoa, hey, okay.
This was getting into some of this like really close contact of a human actor who we're not getting rid of or replacing. The bottle, we're using the bottle. It's literally
That is okay, because I was about to say that's the most perfect CG bottle of water I've ever seen in my life. I wanted to shout that out, but that's the real bottle you're keeping. Are you adding the refraction of the ape into the liquid?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a digital bottle that we're match moving to match the whiskey bottle that's in his hand.
Just to capture the refraction of the ape in it.
But the mist that he's spitting out, like that's actually Toby's spit that's flying out of his mouth.
But the proportions between them don't match. So how do you reconcile the position of the bottle with a hand and the position of a mouth with spray?
Well, we know where the hand has to be in frame. And so the thing that changes is where the elbow and the shoulder have to be to make that happen.
Yeah. When it comes to retargeting animation, retargeting basically is taking the skeleton from something that doesn't match another skeleton and essentially making the animation work for that new skeleton. It's puppeting in a way. How do you retarget animation like that when the limbs are changing and the positions are changing? Like, how do you make that make sense?
That's where the art comes into this process, you know? Like, the algorithm can give us a starting point, but at some point an animator can come in there and go, well, what if we just did this instead? You know, none of this stuff is feed dots into a black box and out comes an ape. I mean, like it's feed dots into a black box, that gives you a skeleton. The skeleton gets handed off to the motion edit team and they make choices. They hand it off to animation, who gets in there and has to do the fingers and all the things that we're not capturing on the day, and the face, obviously, to make sure that all of that facial performance is reading the way that it needs to read. Because obviously the topology of an ape's face and a human's face are quite different.
And I imagine the musculature too is very different.
Yeah, they have a very different shape to them. And so if the character went, ah ha ha, and we did that to the ape face, it might look terrifying. And so incredibly skilled facial animators come into the mix and make creative choices about, well, I see what they're doing, and I bet if I use these muscles instead of those muscles, it'll hit the same note emotionally, even though it's not literally doing the same thing, you know? So that's the other part of this equation that maybe hasn't been given enough attention, is that, you know, while Andy was driving Caesar, like unquestionably that was his performance that we were putting on the screen. It's not Andy you're seeing on screen. It's a digital character. The Andy's driving, you know. There's always this beautiful partnership between an animator and the actor, you know, to make these characters. It's a really unique hybrid way of making a performance, you know.
So there are a few other massive leaps in the visual effects of Dawn. The first thing I notice is all that wet fur. A bunch of fur that's just damp.
Is just really wet, yeah. and for obvious reasons. I mean, like, so much of this film lives in this Vancouver rainforest kind of vibe. The wetness on the fur, and also just the way that the droplets of all this rain are like running down. It was a heavy part of our process in terms of the look development of the characters and everything else.
So those are the guide hairs that we're seeing.
Exactly.
For those of you who don't know, guide hairs are basically the hairs in charge of the rest of the instanced hairs that show up later. They're the ones that will basically be the interpolative points for other hairs. So if we've got a guide hair here and a guide hair here, any hairs that are created come render time will morph between those two guide hairs. So you can simulate with a lot less and have a lot more come render time.
As part of that, the grooming process that the modelers do, they can specify, you know, how clumped the hairs are in this area versus that area, and it's literally like using a brush to kind of clump those hairs together. Also, they're wearing, you know, war paint. If we get in for close-ups, you'll even see that some of the hairs actually have some caked on war paint on the hairs, as if the fingers putting that stuff on just kind of smeared it into the hair.
Ape! Home!
We start in this film getting into more of this concept of like ape speaking and what does that look like and what does it feel like for the performers. Obviously that carries into the next film.
Bad ape.
Bad ape. Bad ape.
Such a fun character. I mean, a lot of our characters either had been very grunty or, you know, monosyllabic, and most of what we were doing in these movies was sign language. Bad Ape is obviously like the chattiest of the characters that we had in these films to this point.
Oh no!
You know, just what Steve Zahn gave us in this movie is just gold. I mean, like, such a beautiful performance.
New friends.
Steve found the voice, but we had to make sure that we could sell that voice coming out of his face.
Well, that's the question. The shape of the human mouth and the structure of the mouth, I'm sure, lends itself very heavily to why it looks right when I'm speaking like this and my mouth is moving like this. You put those same motions on an ape's mouth, and it's probably going to be quite jarring.
Yeah, I mean, and this scene when he's actually like talking while he's eating a cracker, you know, the specific way and the reference that we were looking at of a chimp eating whatever he was eating, and having to figure out every chew and what the lips are having to do and what the tongue is doing at that point.
It's even that, like, the lip on that chew, the way the lip comes out more, you know, it kind of swings out, adding that weight to the face. Like, it makes such a big difference in it feeling natural and good. This was the fun fact. I've always gone to see these movies with my dad in theater, and this was the movie in particular. I think it was when Bad Ape was being candlelit. I turned to him and I said, "We made it." That was my we made it moment. He had no idea what I was talking about, but to me, I just had to tell somebody. I was like, "We did it, Dad, we did it."
So the big thing, and I think we were just seeing some of that come through on this, the big thing that came into the process on War for the Planet of the Apes by this point, we're using Fizzlight.
Fizzlight, can you tell us what that is?
Fizzlight is a way of specifying the lighting in a scene that's actually based on physical units. And so the way we're essentially dealing with our camera, we're actually dealing with camera exposure, ISO, t-stops, aperture, the lens, that kind of thing. We're dealing with physical light units, essentially specifying how many lumens a light source is putting out. We can actually take measurements of like, what was this light putting out at 1 meter away or something, and actually plug that in and have a meaningful result. But it also, part of the Fizzlight part of it is it's entirely spectral light transport. And so we can actually literally measure, like with a spectrometer, and plug in the specific spectral emission characteristics of all of our light fixtures. We're working kind of start to finish with actual real world light.
Because that's the thing, it's translating what you're seeing and what you're doing on set into the 3D world, and you've essentially built a bridge to maintain that one-to-one value, so you know they match.
Because otherwise you're just having to guess, like, oh, I think this should be a little bit brighter, and you just like up the exposure on
yeah,
that
or you're changing settings on your camera that maybe are arbitrary. Like, I don't know, just take the exposure up another quarter stop, I guess. I don't know. Because it all matches the real world, we can talk to filmmakers or DPs in actual terms that make sense. You know, we can, if they were shooting on a T2.8, we plug in T2.8 and we get exactly the same exposure as we should have been getting. And so that's why it's so crucial, or such a big focus for us on these shows, that we're collecting as much information about what actually went down at every setup. Where were the lights? What color temperature were they? What was the camera white balanced for? All this information. And so we're like this vacuum just hoovering up.
Even stuff you might not need, just to have it in case you need it in the future.
We're never going to be able to get this back again. So collect everything we can on set right now. Even if we don't use it, at least we have it.
Oh, whoa, wait.
That is an amazing reference.
So did Weta Workshop build that?
They sure did, yeah.
Let's go.
Silicon bust, basically. This stuff was hugely helpful for the process because we could take the digital version of that head that matched, just drop that into the shot and just verify whether we needed to make any lighting adjustments or whether the ground truth was in a good place to start lighting the shot creatively. The problem with some of these is they tend to get really heavy. You look at the faces of some of the data wranglers on set and they're like,
you're on stuffy duty today. He's like, no, please.
yeah.
Now, what about the integration between the apes and like real people? Like this shot here, the girl is hugging Maurice.
Yeah.
And the hair is like perfectly integrated with her. Like the contact shadows are flawless. Yeah. And then I look at the plate, I'm just like, how?
Yeah, Karen Konoval, who plays Maurice, they had to give something to essentially pad Karen out because she's petite, something for Amaya to wrap her arms around that was going to give us at least something in the ballpark of the size of Maurice. But the nice thing is, at least with this, is by the time we got to this film, we had a pretty good idea how big Maurice was. We knew his exact dimensions. We could give dimensions to, say, costumes.
Why do the orangutans look so darn good? They look so good, and I don't understand. Is it like the melanin in the fur or something that just
It's exactly that.
different?
We had noticed on Rise and through Dawn that if you would get Maurice into like a heavily backlit scenario, the fur would tend to glow in weird ways. And so there was, again, another big push to essentially simulate what each of those components of animal hair does to light that's coming in from behind, let's say, as it scatters around. Human hair doesn't have those same components inside of it. This scene outside the shack in particular, I think, was a really beautiful confirmation that it was actually working properly. The culmination, the climax of the film here really is this giant avalanche. As you can imagine, this was in effects for months. Just sort of, we can't just push the button, let it roll downhill, and say, well, that's what you get. We get into conversations about, I wish it didn't get to camera that quickly, or I wish that part got here sooner and that part didn't, and you start getting into ways to actually art direct.
But it's physics. Yeah. It's hard to just you can't just change the physics to make the shot work. So you got to change like little inputs up at the top maybe a little bit. And all the trees are covered in snow and they're shaking and the snow's falling off the trees and then integrating into the blizzard of it all.
That was the other great thing on this show too. Is this was a really great use of a tool set that we had been putting together called Totara, which is a New Zealand tree. Essentially a tree growth algorithm that is how we could populate a landscape with all these pine trees that we had to do in a very believable way without having to hand place this tree and that tree. Totara. It would essentially allow us to say, I want these kinds of trees, they should be roughly this big, but it would arrive at that point by essentially growing them. And so where you'd have two trees that were close together, you'd start to get the phenomenon of canopy shyness where the trees wouldn't actually go through each other. They would kind of
Oh my gosh, wait, so it's a system where you're planting seeds?
Yeah.
You're planting seeds based on what, the geography of the space? Yeah. Like where they would naturally fall? Yeah. And then it does a simulation under the hood where it actually grows them.
They actually would avoid each other the same way that real trees would, but not just the trees themselves, but it also allows us to then populate where lower trees and the kind of ground cover might crop up underneath those trees, instead of having to try and have some poor layout artist, spending hours and hours and hours trying to hand place all these trees.
It's just crazy. The amount of, whoever would have thought, you go, oh yeah, well, let's just lay out some trees. Yeah, just randomly place them, change the variance or whatever. No. Let's build a system that plants the seeds and we'll have them grow where they should and how they should. It's just incredible stuff.
So everything we've covered here informed the work that Erik's team did on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which we are very excited to cover in a future episode, and it's coming soon. Everyone, you gotta go see this movie. I cannot recommend it enough.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Erik. This is absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure.
I guess we'll see you on the next one. Well, not you, but us two. Turn off the camera.